Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little. I'm here today with another fun hand for PokerNews.com. Today we are playing 2550 No Limit. I don't get to play a ton of cash games anymore, mainly because a lot of the tournaments have figured out that if they have a re-entry tournament at noon, and then also another tournament at 5 p.m., well, people can play tournaments pretty much as long as they want. Whereas in the past, if I showed up to a tournament series and they had one tournament at noon and that was it, and you couldn't re-enter, if I busted before about 7 or 8 p.m., I would just go play cash games till midnight. But now that's not much of an option, just because there are lots of good tournaments available. That said, I still do find myself playing cash games from time to time. I believe this cash game was from Borgata. This was probably on a day 1B, where I made it through day 1A of the main event, and day 1B was an off day. And I found myself playing 2550 against a few good players. You're usually going to find that most of the higher stakes games run when there are one or two weak players at the table, and that was the case today. This opponent, though, is a very good world-class player who plays super high roller tournaments. I mean, he's in there banging with the best of them on a regular basis, and that's going to be important in this hand. Definitely a loose aggressive player, plays way more than his fair share of pots, and between me and you, he likes to bluff a little bit too much. So he raises to 150, and I have ace-jack of spades on the button, playing 200 big blinds deep. This is a spot where you can definitely 3-bet. I think 3-betting is perfectly fine. But, like I just said, this player really likes to be aggressive. So do I want to 3-bet and then get 4-bets? I actually don't think it's the end of the world if I was to 3-bet to 450 here and he makes it 1800. I can just clearly call in position with a pretty strong hand. But I think in general, calling's probably going to be better, especially if I don't necessarily want to play big pots. And also, if I want to keep the players and the blinds in. And I remember in this particular hand, the big blind was the weaker player at the table who I wanted to play pots with, right? So whenever you want to play pots with a specific player, try to find ways to keep them in. Like if, let's say, the weaker player was in seat 4 and he folded, then I'd be way more inclined to 3-bet this ace-jack suited. But when he's in the big blind, I'm going to be way more inclined to call. So that's usually how I'm going about thinking about pre-flop strategies in general, whether or not you want to be 3-betting or calling decently strong hands. But this time they both fold. Both blinds fold, and we see it heads up in position, which is great. Flop becomes queen jack 3. I'm clearly going to call any flop bet. Opponent bets 300 into 375, which is on the bigger side. I wish he would have bet a little bit smaller. That would make me think he's betting a wider range. Typically, as people use bigger bet sizes, it starts to polarize their range a bit to good made hands, like a queen or better, or a good queen or better, or bluffs. And in this scenario, most of the bluffs have some equity. Like if he's sitting here with king 9, right? He has plenty of equity against me. That said, I don't want to raise, because if he does have the queen, I'm just completely screwed, and I don't want to play a gigantic pot. And if he does have king 9, well, he's not really giving himself a great price to draw to it immediately, so it's not so bad to let him see the free turn, or the $300 turn. He does, I do call, turns it to a clubs, and now he checks. So this is good. I have the best hand almost every time. He probably bet the flop with some low equity bluff like king 9 or 9-8 of diamonds or something like that, and got a pretty crappy turn. So if the opponent does have a gut shot, what do I want to do? Well, a lot of people think you want to bet and make the opponent fold the gut shot. But if he folds a gut shot, notice he only had 4 outs or maybe 7 outs to get there, and we take away his opportunity to bluff the river. Remember, this opponent loves to bluff, and I think he probably thinks I'm generally on the weaker side, just because whenever I tend to play big pots, I tend to have good hands. Or bluffs. If your opponent thinks you're on the weaker side, and you are in this situation, you want to do everything you can to give him the opportunity to bluff you. So how do I let the opponent bluff? Well, there are two options. I can either bet very small, like $250 or $400, which will hopefully make the opponent think that I have some sort of marginal made hand that will fold to aggression. But do I really want to bet 400, get check raised to 2,000, and then face a river all in? I mean, not really. If you tell me the opponent's range is just really tilted towards bluffs, then the answer is clearly yes, because if he's bluffing like 70% of the time, I just win the pot 70% of the time and lose at 30. And would I like to play for all the money with 70% equity? Clearly we do. But I don't necessarily know that's going to happen. But I am way more confident that if the turn goes check-check, the opponent's going to at least consider bluffing with his hands that have no showdown value on the river. So it's one of these spots where as you know more and more about the opponent's strategies, like how willing he is to run a gigantic bluff, that's going to allow you to make better decisions as to whether or not you should just be happy to bet the turn with the idea that I'm going to get raised a lot, I'm going to call, and then I'm going to call the river bet with this middle pair. I don't know that yet, though. Anyway, river's a 6, so 5-4 gets there. And now the opponent bets, casual 2,700, 3 times the size of the pot. Okay, so at this point, we want to figure out how many combinations of nut hands our opponent has, and then figure out how many bluffs or potential bluffs the opponent has. Most likely, the opponent's just going to be balanced here, so whatever I do, it doesn't really matter. In that scenario, if the opponent is balanced, you should call with all hands that do not block your opponent's bluffs. So what are the obvious bluffs here? I think obvious bluffs are hands like 9-8 or King 9, right? Maybe hands like Ace 10 would decide to bluff, but Ace 10 has a little bit of showdown value, so I'm not sure that's a good bluffing hand. If you think about it, though, his only nut hands here are 5-4 suited, which maybe he bets the flop, maybe he doesn't. He'd almost certainly bet the clubs on the turn. So there's like 3 or 4 combinations of those. Pocket 6s, which makes a lot of sense. There's 7 combinations of nut hands at that point. He could also have like weird slow played hands like Queen Jack sometimes, but now we're starting to like really discount the combination. So there's 7 obvious ones that would like to play this way. But then again, he may just bet 5-4s all on the turn. Who knows? So if it's, I don't know, call it 12 combinations of nut hands. Now you want to look at how many bluffs there are. And here we need to come up with something like 10 bluff hands to justify calling it off. So he could easily have King 9 suited, like I said, not of clubs, so there's 3 of those. He could easily have 9-8, not of clubs, there's 3 of those. He could easily have maybe 10-8, not of clubs, there's 3 of those. Well, there's 9 right there, right? He could also have some weaker ace highs like Ace 5 and Ace 4, probably not of clubs, so there's 3 of each of those. Now we're up to 15 combinations that are possible. We only need to come up with 10 that he will actually bluff. The thing is, we don't really know how often he will bluff. And this is why it's difficult to determine how you should play on the river, because we know the proportions the opponent has to have to be balanced. But what we don't know is if the opponent is actually balanced. Like, let's say, for example, the opponent just thinks I'm an extreme calling station. Then clearly I should not call, right? Let's say the opponent realizes that I call a decent chunk here, and he decides to now value bet all queens this way. Maybe, Queen 9 and better. Maybe Queen 10 and better. Maybe King Queen and better. Who knows? If he value bets King Queen and better, now all of a sudden he has 12 combinations of King Queen, 12 combinations of Ace Queen, and then 6 of Aces and Kings, right? So now we're up at 36 combinations on top of the already 7 that we had. So now there's just a load of value hands and almost no bluffs. There's like 12 or 15 or, I don't know, maybe 25 maximum combinations of bluffs. So now, if he's bluffing every time but value betting King, Queen, and better, we have a very easy fold. Of course, we do block the Ace, Queen, and pocket aces, so that is relevant. I did not mention that, but you should definitely take that into account. Anyway, against this player, I know he likes to bluff. If I know someone likes to bluff a lot, I just don't fold. If you like to bluff a lot, I'll tell you the secret to beat me. Just stop bluffing. Never, ever bluff me again, and you'll probably print money. Because, in this situation, we popped it in here relatively fast. Actually, it's very important. Whenever you do call in this spot against your opponent, you want to make sure that you make your opponent think that you have a close decision. A lot of players will think that if you thought for 4 minutes before calling, that it actually was a close decision. But, I'm telling you, if I played this hand today against this player, I'm call every time in 1 second. Like, I don't even have to think about it. I know I'm calling. And you may say, well, why Hollywood? Why waste everyone's time? You're not really wasting time if you are inducing this particular loose aggressive player to continue making this bluff in the future. Because imagine in this scenario, we know the opponent's bluffing 70% of the time. Well, I certainly want to maintain that. You don't want to instead call the opponent in like 1 second and say, haha, I know you bluff too much, I call you. Because what's going to happen? Now, the opponent's going to think, man, that was a bad bluff. I'm clearly not going to bluff Jonathan Little again. Whereas if you tank for a while, not 4 minutes, but 2 minutes or so, the opponent's going to think, okay, I almost made him fold this hand. Maybe I should have bet a little bit less or a little bit more. But their thought does not immediately go to, that was a bad bluff because the opponent called with middle pair. The thought process instead goes to, how could I have played this slightly differently to induce a fold? And I know the answer is you just can't. But The opponent does not know that. They're going to continue trying this type of play in the future if you make them think that it was a reasonable play. Or, if you feel like having a little bit of table talk with your opponent, say, oh man, I almost folded. That was a great bluff, but couldn't fold my hand this time. Say something ridiculous like that. Not that it really matters. What you don't want to do, though, is you don't want to just call him and say, ha, gotcha. You suck. Right? Don't do that. So that's going to be it for today. I called, the opponent mucked his hand, and we won a nice little pot. It's always good to win a nice pot on your off day. And that's it. So, if you all have any questions for me, feel free to ask on Twitter at Jonathan Little. I'm always happy to help. Good luck in your games, and I'll be back next week with another fun video here on Poker News.